Have you ever noticed how certain videos appear on your screen at the exact moment you need to hear them? Well, it's not the magic of the algorithm nor chance. It's the unconscious asking for entry. Carl Jung said that nothing is coincidence, and that when life wants to speak to you, it uses signals that the ego tries to ignore. Perhaps you've come this far because you're tired of pretending everything is fine, when in reality you feel a silent emptiness inside. Perhaps because the answers you seek never came from anyone else's mouth, but were hidden in your own shadow. The truth is uncomfortable. You didn't choose to watch this video. It chose you. And if this sounds controversial, it's because what will be revealed here isn't for everyone. It's only for those who are truly ready to hear what their consciousness has hidden for too long. The hidden signs of the unconscious that you never noticed. There are times when life seems to whisper hidden truths, but almost no one pays attention. Signs of the unconscious don't appear on bright billboards or in newspaper headlines. They emerge in subtle details like a recurring dream, a strange forgetfulness, or even that nagging feeling of déjà vu. Carl Jung said that the unconscious speaks through symbols, not direct words. It's as if the hidden mind uses secret codes that require careful reading. When a person repeats the same mistakes in relationships, for example, it's not bad luck. It's the unconscious screaming that something is unresolved. The problem is that in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, the ego prefers to ignore it. And the more the persona feigns normality, the stronger the shadow that insists on manifesting itself becomes. Imagine someone who, without realizing it, always chooses jobs where the boss psychologically resembles the authoritarian father from their childhood. This pattern isn't coincidence. It's the unconscious trying to reenact an old wound so that this time it can be seen and healed. It's shadow work knocking on the door even when the person can't name it. True spirituality doesn't begin by lighting incense or reciting mantras, but by recognizing the hidden choreography of the soul. Jung called these archetypes fundamental pieces of the psyche, which disguise themselves in everyday situations. A phrase passing through the mind, an unexpected intuition, or even a seemingly banal encounter can carry hidden messages. The curious thing is that when you learn to observe, these signs seem to multiply. The song that plays on the radio at the exact moment you think about giving up, the phrase from a stranger that answers a question you didn't even dare voice, or even the illness that appears as a metaphor for what you insist on keeping quiet. These details are more than coincidences. They are the living language of the unconscious. But here's the intriguing point. These signs never come randomly. They only appear when there's a lesson ready to be learned. And it's precisely at this point that the inevitable question arises. When exactly does life decide to reveal what you need to see? The exact moment when life reveals what you need. Life has a timing that borders on the mysterious. There's no point in rushing, no point in taking shortcuts, because the unconscious doesn't work according to the clock of anxiety, but to the rhythm of inner need. Carl Jung said that the psyche reveals only what consciousness can bear. This is why certain truths seem invisible for years, until a banal event, a conversation, a loss, an unexpected journey, opens a portal of understanding. The ego grows impatient, wanting everything here and now, but authentic spirituality teaches that each revelation arrives at its right time. It's not about punishment or privilege, but about psychological maturity. It's like when someone tries to explain quantum physics to a child. It doesn't make sense because they don't yet have the framework to absorb it. A practical example: consider someone facing the painful end of a relationship. In the heat of the breakup, they only see chaos, pain, and resentment. But months later, when the dust settles, they realize that the separation was the trigger for rediscovering their own identity. Life only revealed the lessons learned when there was room to see them without masks. This dynamic is similar to the process of shadow work. The shadow doesn't present itself completely all at once, because that would crush consciousness. It insinuates itself in parts, waiting for the ego to lower its guard and allow the archetypes to reveal their true transformative power. The exact moment is never rational. It's always existential, linked to inner preparation. And here comes the irony. Often, while the ego insists that it wasn't the right time for a loss, a change, or an encounter, the unconscious reveals that the timing was perfect. What seemed like bad luck or cruelty was deep down just life following an invisible script. When someone loses a job and soon after discovers a much better opportunity, it becomes clear that the apparent downfall was actually a push from the self. It's this disconcerting synchronicity that makes one wonder, is all this really a coincidence, or was Jung right when he said that nothing happens by chance? Why Jung believed that nothing is coincidence? When Jung said that nothing is coincidence, he wasn't referring to a rigid destiny, as if we were stuck in a fixed and unalterable script. What he saw was something more sophisticated: synchronicity. This concept arises from the perception that certain external events seem to dialogue directly with the soul's internal states. A simple example: someone thinks of an old friend and, on the same day, receives an unexpected message from them. To the skeptic, this is pure chance. For Jung, it's the collective unconscious revealing a hidden order behind the apparent chaos. This insight breaks with the cold logic of the ego and opens space for a living spirituality, where archetypes express themselves through the invisible fabric of reality. Note that these events cannot be controlled, and that's precisely the beauty. There's no point in asking for magical coincidences to happen every day, because they don't obey your conscious will. It's like shadow work. You don't choose when the shadow will manifest. It simply emerges when there's an opening. Jung argued that synchronicity was a bridge between mind and world, as if the psyche and the universe shared the same stage. And it's curious how, in moments of crisis or decision, these signs become more frequent, as if life itself were inclined to guide those who dare to listen. It's no wonder that so many spiritual traditions, from the Chinese I Ching to indigenous visions, already intuited this same principle long before Jung described it. A concrete example might illustrate: a person has been studying spirituality for years, but only decides to truly immerse themselves in it when, in the same period, they lose a job, receive an invitation to a retreat, and find a forgotten Carl Jung book in a bookstore. The convergence of these events is no mere coincidence. It is synchronicity, showing that the soul is ready for a leap. When we understand this, we realize that even seemingly trivial details can carry messages. But then, the inevitable question arises: if nothing is coincidence, how can we recognize the silent call of the self, which only appears when we are ready? The silent call of the self that only appears when you are ready. The self doesn't shout. It doesn't knock violently, nor does it send registered letters. It whispers. And yet, this silent call is capable of shaking the entire structure built by the ego. Jung understood the self as the regulating center of the psyche, that which unites the conscious and unconscious in a dance of totality. But this call doesn't arise when you want it to, but when you can bear it. It's like a child who only learns to walk when their legs are strong enough. Before that, any attempt would be a painful fall. True spirituality works this way. You can even seek shortcuts, but the self only manifests when there is maturity to face the shadows and masks that sustain the persona. A clear sign of this calling can be that nagging feeling of emptiness, even when seemingly everything is fine. You have a good job, a stable relationship, friends nearby, but something inside insists on whispering, "That's not all." This is the self asking for entry, trying to show that life cannot be reduced to social success checklists. Shadow work arises precisely from this call, looking at what has been repressed, facing the shadow, allowing hidden archetypes to bring to light truths the ego would rather avoid. Practical examples? People who abandon decades-long careers to pursue an artistic vocation, or those who, after an existential crisis, decide to seriously study spirituality, not because it's fashionable, but because something within them no longer gives them rest. This call, however, is never obvious. It appears in recurring dreams, in the feeling of being out of place, or even in that silent discomfort when looking in the mirror and feeling that the reflected image doesn't match what lives inside. It's as if your entire life were just a rehearsal, and suddenly the self says, now it's the main scene, and when this call comes, there's no way to ignore it for long without becoming ill inside. The curious thing is that by accepting this invitation, you begin to realize that external events seem to respond directly to your soul. And it is at this point that a powerful revelation emerges. Synchronicity becomes the universe's preferred language for communicating with those who dare to hear this call. Synchronicity as the universe's response to your soul. Jung realized that there are events so improbable that it would be naive to call them simply coincidence. He coined the term synchronicity to describe these meaningful encounters between the inner world and external events. It's as if the universe were a living mirror, reflecting the state of the soul in symbols, people, and circumstances. Imagine someone who considers changing careers but doesn't have the courage. On the same day, they receive an unexpected offer for a position in exactly the field they dreamed of. The ego calls it luck, but spirituality reveals it's the self answering the call. Synchronicity isn't cheap magic, but a silent confirmation that the psyche and reality dance to the same rhythm. These signs don't obey statistical logic, and that's precisely why they're so impactful. Think of someone who, after months of silent suffering, opens a book by Carl Jung, and on the first page finds the exact phrase that describes their pain. Or that unlikely encounter with someone who shares the same life story at the moment when you most needed to feel understood. The ego tries to explain rationally but fails. Archetypes, which live in the collective unconscious, seize these moments to manifest themselves. It's shadow work infiltrating external reality, demonstrating that there's no rigid separation between what's inside and what's outside. The practice, in this case, is learning to observe. How many times have you ignored small signs because you were distracted? Keeping a journal, for example, can be a powerful exercise, writing down dreams, unexpected encounters, phrases that coincidentally appear, and then revisiting them to notice patterns. By doing this, you begin to notice that answers are always arriving, but rarely in the way the ego would like. And herein lies the mystery. Synchronicity doesn't happen to massage superficial desires, but to guide the soul on the path to individuation. And when the unconscious begins to move this way, something inevitable happens. It decides, in its own time, to pierce the veil of the persona. When the unconscious decides to break the veil of the persona is that social mask we all wear to survive in the world. It's not a problem in itself. On the contrary, it's necessary for living in society, just as proper clothing is necessary for the cold. The problem arises when someone starts to believe the mask is their own skin. At this point, the unconscious can no longer tolerate the pretense and begins to crack. Carl Jung said that the psyche will always seek balance, and when the ego over-identifies with the persona, the unconscious responds with symptoms, anxiety attacks, depression, disturbing dreams, or even physical illness. It's as if the shadow, stifled for so long, rebels to demand space. Spirituality comes into play here, reminding us that living by appearances may deceive the world, but it never deceives the soul. A practical example of this is the person who for years pretends to be strong and unshakable, but suddenly crumbles at the slightest setback. Or the person who maintains the image of being nice and always available until they explode in a seemingly unprovoked fit of rage. These ruptures aren't flaws, they're necessary cracks. The unconscious is saying it no longer accepts the persona's charade. This movement is, in fact, an invitation to shadow work, so that denied archetypes can find legitimate expression. Life uses these fissures to reveal what was hidden. It's uncomfortable, no doubt, but also liberating. After all, no one can sustain a persona forever without paying an internal price. When the veil of the persona shatters, the person finds themselves before a starker mirror where there are no filters or staging. And it is precisely in this space that the self begins to send more direct messages. The ego resists, trying to glue the pieces of the mask back together, but discovers there is no way to return to the previous state. It's like breaking a vase. No matter how much it sticks together, it will never be the same. This rupture makes room for something greater, and paradoxically is accompanied by a profound inner silence. And it is in this uncomfortable silence that the next stage of the journey emerges, the emptiness that precedes all spiritual awakening. The emptiness that precedes every spiritual awakening. Few human experiences are as disconcerting as emptiness. It arrives without warning, draining meaning from things that once seemed sufficient. Work, achievements, relationships. Suddenly nothing seems to fill. The ego, desperate, chases after distractions, new goals, immediate pleasures. But emptiness is relentless. It refuses to be fooled by palliatives. Jung understood this moment as an inevitable stage in the process of individuation. It is the withdrawal of the persona, the suspension of old certainties, the dark interval before the self reveals itself. Spirituality does not soften this journey. On the contrary, it asserts that emptiness is the womb of transformation, a fertile space where the shadow can finally be heard. This emptiness is easily confused with depression or an existential crisis, and often it even manifests as such symptoms. But there's a crucial difference. While depression imprisons, this emptiness invites. It asks you to stop running and look within. Imagine someone who, after achieving everything they ever wanted, the house, the car, the successful career, suddenly asks themselves, is this all there is? This discomfort is the self calling, pulling the rug out from under illusions so that the person realizes that life cannot be reduced to external achievements. Here, shadow work becomes inevitable. By facing the shadow, you begin to realize that emptiness is not absence, but preparation for something greater. And it's curious how, at this point, Jung's spirituality and psychology converge. Both understand that before awakening, there is always a collapse. Like the night before dawn, the void prepares consciousness to receive a light that would otherwise be unbearable. Many resist, trying to fill the void with consumption, relationships, or superficial beliefs. But those who dare to remain in this dark silence discover that there is a hidden order amidst the nothingness. And it is precisely in this arid terrain that the shadow, patiently repressed, begins to move, insisting on revealing itself at the right time. The shadow that insists on revealing itself at the right time. The shadow is in no hurry. It can wait decades, silent until the ground is ready. Jung said that what we reject within ourselves never disappears. It merely hides, and sooner or later returns. This return rarely happens when the ego would like. It happens when the psyche decides it's time. How often does someone explode with rage after years of accumulating silences? How often does a childhood trauma resurface just when external life seems more stable? This isn't bad luck. It's the unconscious opening its way. The shadow insists on revealing itself when there's enough energy to integrate it, because there's no point in rushing the process if the consciousness still can't handle it. Shadow work, at this point, presents itself as an inevitable act, not as a spiritual luxury. The person can run away, deny it, mask their pain with superficial spirituality, but the shadow will find gaps. It's like a forgotten archetype. It knocks on the door through intense dreams, behavioral lapses, psychosomatic illnesses, or even accidental encounters with people who mirror our wounds. A practical example? Someone who always prided themselves on being controlled and rational finds themselves falling in love in an overwhelming way, completely losing their composure. The shadow manifests, showing that true balance arises not from repression, but from integration. This process, though uncomfortable, is deeply necessary. Each revelation of the shadow is like a piece of us returning home, and the more it reveals itself, the more we realize there is no enemy within us, only forgotten parts, begging for recognition. The self knows this, and so it allows the shadow to manifest only at the exact moment when consciousness has the structure to deal with it. This perfect timing creates situations that, at first glance, seem surreal. Unexpected encounters, life twists and turns, falls and rebirths. It is at this point that the shadow gives way to something even more transformative. The unexpected encounter that transforms destiny into revelation. The unexpected encounter that turns destiny into revelation. There are encounters that seem casual, but carry the force of a silent earthquake. You meet someone in line, on a trip, or even in a banal exchange of words, and life is never the same again. Jung said that these connections don't arise by chance, but as manifestations of synchronicity. The self uses people as living mirrors. Sometimes this encounter brings great love, other times a teacher, in some cases even a necessary enemy. What matters is not the form, but the impact. It's as if, suddenly, the soul is pulled in a direction the ego would never dare choose on its own. Spirituality teaches that these intersections are not planned by the mind, but by the unconscious that weaves destinies in silence. A clear example of this are encounters that reveal truths you weren't willing to hear. Imagine someone who always believed themselves to be strong and self-sufficient, but encounters someone whose vulnerability shatters that facade. Or someone who runs away from spirituality and, upon meeting someone who lives this dimension naturally, feels called to dive in as well. These encounters act as catalysts. They accelerate internal processes, poke at hidden wounds, and allow shadow work to take shape. And the most curious thing, it's impossible to predict when they will happen. Just as archetypes emerge spontaneously, these people arrive when the psyche is already ripe for revelation. What we often fail to realize is that each unexpected encounter is, deep down, an invitation. Not just to get to know the other, but to get to know ourselves through the other. Jung said that the unconscious is projected into relationships, and that's why these connections carry transformative power. They can be the key to an entire destiny. But at the same time, they require courage, because it's no use simply finding the mirror. You have to endure the reflection. And it's in this moment of confrontation that something even more profound emerges. The truth that only appears when your consciousness can bear to see it. The truth that only appears when your conscience can bear to see it. Truth doesn't arrive when you want it. It arrives when you can. Jung said that the psyche has a self-protection mechanism. It only allows consciousness to face what it already has the structure to bear. This is why so many people spend years believing convenient stories about themselves, until one day the sandcastle crumbles. The ego calls this a tragedy, but it is actually liberation. Spirituality teaches that truth is not punishment, it is healing, but a healing that only works when you are ready to receive it. It's like opening a window in a dark room. If done too soon, the light blinds. If done at the right time, it illuminates. A practical example. Someone who has always defined themselves as a victim of circumstance may spend years blaming others until a painful event, a loss, a divorce, a bankruptcy, reveals something deeper, that their own omission and fear of making choices sustained that role. This truth is unbearable at first because it dismantles the carefully constructed persona. But this is precisely where shadow work comes in. By facing this revelation, the person has the chance to integrate a forgotten part of themselves, assuming responsibility and freedom at the same time. This is the Jungian paradox. The pain of seeing the shadow is the same portal that opens to individuation. And when this truth arrives, it rarely comes alone. It usually brings with it a series of synchronicities, encounters, and signs that confirm the time is now. It is at this point that consciousness expands and the self takes over, reorganizing all of life around the new perception. And even if the ego tries to resist, something has already changed forever. This is the moment when the person understands that nothing they experienced was an accident, that every pain, every silence, and every fall were part of a larger script. And it is precisely here that the cycle closes. The recognition that none of this is accidental, the unconscious has always known the right time. Now that you've explored each layer of this exploration of Carl Jung, the ego, the persona, shadow work, and archetypes, the question remains, what will you do with this? Will you continue to pretend you didn't understand the signals of the unconscious, or will you face head-on the shadow that's already knocking at your door? Spirituality isn't measured by the phrases you repeat, but by the courage to act when the truth tears through the masks. And if you feel something has awakened, don't ignore it. Ask yourself, what signs were already there for me, and I refuse to see them? What emptiness within me isn't a disease, but a calling? And most importantly, how long will I hide behind my persona when my whole life insists on revealing myself? This isn't a reflection for tomorrow, it's for now. If you want to continue this journey of awakening, I'll ask you something simple. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here you won't find anesthesia, but truths that transform. The unconscious has already spoken to you today. The question is, will you keep listening or will you go back to sleep?